his health now. So clearly he was depressed. He was sad, and I think about him writing that letter in Dakota. I would even go so far as to guess that he's writing to the headmaster because he's saying, you know, I could go to school there. If I could come home, I'll go to school there. I'll tell you all about this. And, you know, and there's probably more within the letter that I hadn't gotten to in translation, but that's pretty much enough for me, because what I find in letters after that are that George had left and then he dies. He dies shortly after that. So that is the 4 boys that leave from Sisseton-Wahpeton in 1879. And the girls, Nancy Renville leaves with Gabriel Renville. It says that he came and he took his beautiful boy home when John dies. He took him home, and it says he took his daughter too. Justine Laframboise, and she, from what I know, had attended Carlisle, was very educated, I think was an impressive young woman, and did many things that I think, you know, with that education. But I don't know of anything else really related to this story about her other than, you know, what I've just shared. So the 4 boys there, and then the 2 are buried at the Carlisle Cemetery. And that's where, that pretty much brings us up to speed in case anybody has any questions. That's the amount of research that I've done on this. And I will share one more thing related to this. That as Dakota people, you know, we're very dependent, as I said, on the people, the elders and those that advise us and direct us, and often that's done through prayer. And so when it came to talking about this, and you know, I sit down with some of the older folks and tell them what's happening. Some of the people that do hold some of the spiritual responsibilities within the tribe, to sit down with them and tell them, you know, how things are going. And so at the point where I had learned all of this about George Walker, I sat down with this older man, and he sat there with me for well over an hour and listened to the story about Amos and how Amos had been buried in the cemetery and the white people didn't want him there, and how he had been moved, and listen to the story about John Renville, this amazing, handsome young boy that dies there, and then Edward Upright, and my struggle to find his family, and then George Walker, and about how sad he was, and how, you know, he wanted to come home, and how he dies, and at that point he kind of put his hand up and he said, I feel it, he said, and he was real choked up. And he said, when you, and he kind of put his hand on the picture, on their picture, and he said, you know, he said, when you bring them home, he said, you bring them home like the chiefs that they are, you know, because certainly Wa'anata's son would have received that leadership role. And I could easily imagine each of these boys, John Renville, you know, by all descriptions, being this incredible young man. Had he not died there, can you imagine what he would have done, you know, as his father's heir, as Gabriel Renville's heir? And it's something that we see in all of the different repatriations. It's something that we've seen with the Arapaho. Their whole story is online on YouTube. If you wanted to Google that up, the Arapaho and Yufna Soldier Wolf, and their work with their children. And then, of course, Rosebud, you see American Horse, Spotted Tail, and others, the leaders, the chiefs and leaders. And then with the Cheyenne, you also see their leadership names. And then, of course, for us, Amos Laframboise, which would be the son of Joseph Laframboise, a well-known family. Their history goes all the way back to the 1700s and their interaction with tribes. Obviously, a very strong family in our historical figures. This is his son. And of course, George Walker, I haven't been able to find his family. But so the children of leaders. And when I listen to the Rosebud relatives talk about this and why the children, they're all the children of our leadership, some speculation, and I would feel that it's certainly true because I watched a documentary or a presentation that was put together by one of the researchers at Carlisle Industrial School related to the children there, and it said that the children of the Sioux were selected because the Sioux were most resistant to treaty. And when Russell Eaglebear with Rosebud talks about this, he talks about the connections to the history that's happening at the time with our Lakota relatives and how Little Bighorn had just occurred. You remember, this is 1879. And the feeling at the time, you know, whether it be nationally or locally or whatever it might be. And then, of course, Captain Pratt being a part of the 7th Cavalry. And, you know, kind of putting those details and connections together. I did see in a newspaper article years ago, looking at the treaty signing for 1867, there were other newspapers in my search that came up, and it said that the chiefs are here from the Dakotas. The Sioux chiefs are here. And that as a condition to the negotiations in Washington, D.C., they will be allowed to see their children. So when you put those things together, you can see, you know, where these children are being used as a tool to draw our leadership in to come, sit down, talk, sign away their lands and things that are a part of, sadly, the treaties in our history. But so those are some of the details, I think, behind this. And, you know, we've got a lot more people here now. Thank you, Itancha, for coming. And I don't know if anybody has any questions at this point that they'd like to ask. Otherwise, we can begin. I'll tell everybody how this is going to go, or how I imagine this will go, is that I wanted to share in this first portion, and this is being recorded thanks to Tom Wilson, the radio station and the television station for the tribe. So this being available on YouTube for the people that, due to COVID, were not able to attend or live in other places and not able to be here. And so I wanted to share the background of the boys, and that's the picture that's circulated. The 4 boys that die as a result of their time there at Carlisle. And the background, the research, who they are, their families, all of that sort of stuff. And I'll reiterate the thing that I said on the very front of this, that we are talking about the children at the cemetery. There are many, many Dakota families that have relatives that attended Carlisle. Although I want to get into that story, but this is not that. We are focused in this on the children at the cemetery and the bringing home of the 2 children, Amos Laframboise and Edward Upright. So our guests are here to talk about the process to make that happen. And then hopefully if anybody has any questions, I know I have some people messaging me too, trying to call apparently. And, we'll get some of those things answered too. Okay? Itancha, would you like to say? Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Arnold? Yeah, out on the tables.
Check. Hami takipi. Da beti de chonta was na pechus apero. Da kota chanje mi ta kre ma thohi te khai mak apero mi takipi. Da ha betu ki de abetu ki de wopla thon kini chapi. They asked me to come and make a prayer. I'm very thankful for this. This subject here is very important to me as someone who helps the people here. Because some of the things that we go through today are because of reasons like this. That there are families who are dealing with this trauma and what has happened to their loved ones. And we don't understand how it is passed down from one generation to the next. And I think about and I pray about things and how I'm supposed to help in whatever way I'm asked to. And what I'm going to do today in my opening prayer, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to sing a memorial song for these boys. And I'm going to ask you to make the prayer. Because in our ceremonies, when we conduct the ceremonies, it's the people that call Tukashita here, that call the spirits here to be with us. So I'm going to ask you to pray while I sing for these young boys. And that we're able to do this quickly and soon to help heal what has happened in our past, to help heal this has happened in the history. And it's not only the first time this has happened, it happened many, many times. So I'm happy to be here and to share this song for these young boys, to honor them and to remember them, that we're still remembering them today, that we're still crying for them, we're still praying for them. So if you can make this prayer in your own way, however you pray. Ask Tukasha to be here with us today. Ask God to look at us today, that we are doing something good to help our people, to help us heal as a nation, to help heal that hoop that was broken because of things like this. So Mitakipi, again, I ask you to help me and to make this prayer today. Tukasha te wa kantaka. The Abetiki, Wacheki Wakaga Tukasha, Matkohita Kai Monkey Apido, the Abetiki, Namichiko. The Abetiki Tukasha, the Abetiki kicks up Odoa Tukasha, kicks up Odoa Tukasha. The Abetiki Mitaki Pioas, Abetiki kicks up Dakota Hukshinawa, Noom Tukasha, Ushmakayo Abetiki. Yeah!
Thank you, Arnold, for always being there for the community. Whenever there's a prayer that needs to be asked, he's always stepping forward as a young leader, young traditional in our community. So I thank Arnold for always being there for everybody in prayer, our ceremony. I appreciate Tamara for putting this together through the Thippo office and Diane. They have a passion for this, and her staff for being here and putting everything together. So Nino Wahpeton, as Tamara is one of, I say one of our historians. She won't admit that because she's still young yet. But she relies on a lot of our elders. She spends a lot of time with our elders. And she puts together a lot of stories, and she could sit here. She reminds me of my grandma Stella, pretty son and flute. She could sit here and she could just, without reading from paper or anything, she could just sit there and from memory she could just goes and tells these stories. So that's a gift in itself. And one day when she'll be amongst the elders, and that's what the person that she'll be, the storyteller for our community. And at this time, I want to take this time out to, as leadership to leadership, chairman to chairman, I'd like to invite Chairman Yankton up from the Spirit Lake Oyate. If you could come forward, please. And it's, as I was taught, when we have leadership that come together, you give a time to have them say a few words too. But Chairman Yankton, I sit on the board with Chairman Yankton. We're on the United Tribes board. And I know Chairman Yankton as a community member in the Spirit Lake Oyate. He's, before even his chairman term, he's always active in his community. I always cared about his community and his family members. And Ihana, back in the day, I don't want to sound old, I'm only 46 years young, but I used to be the Yapaha back there on the tribal radio station. So I want to give my shout out to Harry Hopkins, they called him Rambo on the radio station. He did the drum group. Dave DeMars, he's enrolled here, but on the radio station they called him Diamond Dave on the Kabul radio station. And at the time I was working there, and they gave me a chance to work on the radio station. And I worked security over at the casino up there, and I went to school. And I graduated from the Changadeshka Jikana Community College. And at the time it was just a small college. There was only like 7 of us graduated. And Dr. Azure, that's the president here now, that's leading this school. He was my science teacher and math teacher. So, and he helped me through school too, and he was my tutor. So, like we say, we carry ourselves in a good way because sooner or later we're all going to come back and meet each other again. And so that's my little history of the Spirit Lake Oyate. So it's an honor for Chairman Yankton to be up here with me. And I just wanted to have him a chance to say a few words. And first thing I acknowledged him and I asked him if he brought the elders with him. And he said because of the COVID and the other issues, they couldn't come. But I told him that I know if he invites Tamara up there, the Spirit Lake Oyate, I'll bring leadership with myself, and I'll make some time, and I'll go up there, and we can spend time with our relatives up there, because we're both the same tribe. And also, too, before I give them that words, too, I want to acknowledge the leadership here. I want to thank Gypsy Wana representing the Haipa district. She's in attendance, so I appreciate her making her time. And with that, I'm going to give the mic over to Chairman Yankton so he can say a few words and welcome everybody, too.
Thank you, Chairman Hopkins. So it's always good, this is like my 3rd time being here back home on my mother's side. And as Chairman Hopkins stated, and I visited with some of the audience here, we are one tribe. The government caused the division through reservations, but history states, we have one treaty, we were one tribe, and we all separated, but we all have relatives as far east as the Mississippi all the way through Canada. So on my mother's side, my grandma and my great-grandpa, Ed Thompson, when I used to come here and visit relatives, we would all meet what they call down home. So The college that Chairman Hopkins is referring to back home, Shengadeska Chikina, was named after my grandfather. He got killed in the war, World War II. And so that name got carried on by my father. And then when he passed, and just a few years ago, it was decided by the old people in my community that I should carry it on. So that is my Dakota name, is Shengadeska Chikina. My English name is Douglas Yankton, Sr. And I've been actively involved, for the last 20, 25 years in my community in regards to a lot of different youth activities because of I had kids, So for me, when you have kids, you want to be there for them to give them that chance to grow up. And obviously that didn't happen for these ones. They never got to have that chance. They were taken. They never got to have the chance to be with family like we all are today. And so when Tamara reached out to me and told me about this event that she was putting together and the purpose behind it, I was like, I'll be there. Because this involved not only relatives from our communities and our tribe, but there's many more that still need to be brought home. So as long as she's and her staff and this sister tribe of ours is putting forth the effort to do this for both tribes, I'm going to do as much as I possibly can to be involved in it to help bring these two boys home. At that time, they were boys, but in reality, they really are somebody's grandparents. They should have been. And it's unfortunate that, the way things happened back then and that happened to these gentlemen and these kids. We have to at least provide that chance to bring them back and put them and lay them to rest close to relatives so they will know, that they'll be there with somebody else on the other side. So with that, I just came here. I want to sit, listen, and try to see, what we can do as two tribes to bring these people home and send them off in a good way, the way they should have been sent off, the way we send off our people today that, journey on. And nobody should have to have passed away the way they did or how they did without any of our involvement as, the Miniwakan Oyate. So with that, thank you, Chairman Hopkins. Thank you, Tamara, for inviting me. And I am very interested to see, what the next process is to be able to bring these young boys home. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Yankton. I appreciate your words. We appreciate you. I know earlier in this year we sat down with Tamara and we discussed about our bringing back our grandparents, our ancestors, and it's very important that we started in a good way with prayer. It's always important that we're always taught in prayer in our way of life here. And with and I too, like Chairman Yankton said, I wanted to be a part of that when they traveled over there for our ancestors, but I was in the hospital yet. I was still recovering from my surgery from cancer. But I'm thankful for our ceremonies and our Creator for giving me another chance as a second-time cancer survivor to be strong and serve my community the best way I can. So I'm thankful for that, so I could continue to be a part of this also. with Tamara and everybody else, with Chairman Yankton. And I'm looking forward to meeting our other elders, our elders that we hold dear to our hearts, and hear the stories. And myself too. I want to hear all the information that's going to be shared today. So all the presenters, as Arnold opened with a prayer song, and we helped him with that prayer, we're praying for our presenters too as well, to present in a good way. And also too, to remind everybody, we're still in a pandemic. So as I won't be doing my job if I would remind everybody to continue to wear your mask, watch your distance, and wash your hands. And it's just to keep everybody safe. So we want you to be around for our relatives. So I wanted to remind everybody that too. Everybody that comes into our community, but everybody is welcome here in the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate. You come in a good way, and we welcome you in a good way too. And just a heads up too, we're going to be providing a meal too. So at noon sometime. Depends on how long Tamara talks or her presentations. So with that, welcome everybody. Wopita Tanka.
Hamidakiapi, good morning. My name is Diane DeRosier, and I am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate. I'm happy to see all of you here. We have some visitors, and we have some tribal people here. I want to thank the chairmans for both coming, Delbert and Mr. Yankton. Some of our elders are here. I know that this topic is really a sensitive one for many of us. And of course, the work that we do as Tribal Historic Preservation Officers is always, it's really not even work. It's really more of a commitment, because we have a stake in it, because it's who we are as Dakota people. So it's hard to separate and say this is work. Yeah, it's nice that we get paid for it, but it's work that we take home with us every night. It's not work that we can leave at the office because of how sensitive some of the issues are. It affects us, and we have to always remain strong in our prayers and in the beliefs that we have. So I just want to say that sometimes it can be a difficult job. But with prayer and our beliefs, we're able to do it. And I couldn't do it without the help of our elders, and also the societies, the Okora Kichie, that really support us. And that is the veterans groups, the P'te Chante, the women's group, and our own families and our own beliefs really support us. And that's very important. So the work we do is difficult. We have guests here today. We're talking about a very sensitive topic. And I'm going to call them up and ask them to introduce themselves to all of you. And then we will move forward with the program. Pidamayaya.
Okay. While they're getting set up here, go ahead and make yourselves comfortable. Let me move my jacket there. I always seem to take up a lot of room wherever I am, so let me move that. I want to invite the people that are here to be comfortable, have some coffee. There's drinks, rolls, and then we will be having lunch, so be sure and make yourself comfortable. if you have questions, we have microphones that are available. We'll use this one. Maybe you guys can, sure, okay. And then we can bring a microphone out to you to get your questions answered. And then we do have people that are tuning in via the internet. So if they have questions too, if anybody notices something, maybe we can share that question as well. All right, thank you very much. Would you like to begin to introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justin Buller. I am from the Army General Counsel's Office. I have actually met some of you before, back in 2016. It is wonderful to see friendly faces. I want to offer a special thanks to Chairman Hopkins for his hospitality. Thank you so much for inviting us here today, sir. And to Chairman Yankton, thanks for your presence as well. We are incredibly grateful for that. So thank you very much to both of you. Thank you all to everyone who is here today. We are incredibly appreciative of you giving us the opportunity to come and talk with you. And our goal today is to try to help you move forward with bringing your loved ones home.
So good morning, and Chairmans Hopkins and Yankton, thank you so much for having us. My name is Renee Yates. I am the Director of the Office of Army Cemeteries, and I have the distinct honor to care for and be responsible for the individuals who are interred in our post cemeteries, which obviously includes every one of the children interred at the Carlisle Barracks post cemetery. And as Mr. Buller mentioned, we're very excited to be here today to talk about how we can return your two children to your communities. Thank you.
Nakanonetek, nak jinwa, inwa aquatic, manuikanwe ahwa, nakwe. I am Mark Gilfillan. I am Soggy from the Sac and Fox, just down the river, 2 states. I am a tribal liaison for the Army and the Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you, Arnold, for your song and your prayer. Thomas, for smoking us off earlier, thank you for that. And I thank all of you here for your time, and we're here to serve all of the needs for these children to come home. Thank you.
What we want to do now is have a kind of a brief overview of the process and the background to this particular program that the Army's offering. Since I am more than 6 feet from all of you, I'm going to talk without my mask so I don't sound so muffled. Ms. Yates is going to be flipping slides for me here. But fundamentally, back in 2016, Tamara mentioned her earlier, Euphna Soldier Wolf, rather. She originally had reached out to the Army several times, and unfortunately, the Army had done the wrong thing. Just to be real blunt, they had not responded properly to her requests. In 2016, she submitted a 3rd request along with the Rosebud Sioux, asking for their children to be returned home. That was the point where I became involved, along with my colleague Kathleen McLaughlin, who is now retired. And this led to the first consultation, Rosebud, in May of 2016, and then a series of follow-on consultations, listening sessions, and then finally the first rounds of disinterments beginning a little over a year later. Some basic background on this. This program is one that we have designed to try to be as streamlined as possible and have the minimal financial impact to anybody outside the Department of the Army. And for those reasons, this is not a NAGPRA action. This is actually an action under existing Army regulation that allows for family members to request that any family member buried in an Army cemetery be returned to them. And so for those of you that are familiar with NAGPRA, and just a little bit about myself real quick, I'm the senior legal counsel for the U.S. Army for Native American matters. And so I work with a lot of NAGPRA actions, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with how complex and time-consuming those can be at times. So the intent here is to make this a far more streamlined, an easier and less complicated process for the family members seeking to have their loved one return. Because of the circumstances and history of this cemetery, unlike NAGPRA where there is only limited funding available and the like, the U.S. Army is actually paying for all the reasonable costs associated with the disinterment and the return home of the children. As you may be aware, the original cemetery, which was started in 1879 by the Carlisle Industrial School, the property at that time was not part of the U.S. Army. It was actually under the Department of Interior at the time. And the cemetery remained when the school closed. The property was then turned over to the Army, and approximately 10 years later, the Army decided to move the cemetery. The cemetery at that point was located in the back corner of the property. It was near the refuse dump. It was just simply not an appropriate place for the cemetery. But I would suggest the Army should have done the opposite. They should have moved the dump, not the cemetery. It's a really bad idea to move cemeteries. And furthermore, as you can see, I try to be very transparent and direct. The Army never talked to any of the families of these children who are buried in that cemetery. We actually have letters from some of the family members, the fathers, the mothers of these children that are buried in the cemetery, asking for the Department of Interior to return their children to them. And nobody responded to them. Those family members were likely still alive in 1927, and frankly, the Army should have reached out to them and made an effort at that time to return those children then, more than 100 years, nearly 100 years ago. Because that didn't happen, that is why the Army is paying all of the reasonable expenses associated with this undertaking. Please, throughout, if you have questions, please get my attention. Happy to answer any questions you have throughout or at the end. So a little more background on this. This is where we have gotten to this point. So August of 2017, these were the first disinterments, so slightly a year after that initial discussion in Rosebud. We actually did disinter 2 of the Northern Arapaho children and return them to their families. A year later, we did 3 more, 1 more Northern Arapaho, and a Blackfoot and a Sioux child. In 2019, 4 tribes, 4 more children, and then ultimately this last summer, we did the 1 Alaska Native child and then the 10 Rosebud Sioux children. So to date, we have disinterred 21 of the 188 Native American children that are buried in the cemetery at Carlisle Barracks. Mark just offered a good observation. We have actually, in 2016, we sent out letters to every federally recognized tribe, inviting them to consult with us on this matter. In response to that, we actually had several tribes that responded that they understood that they had children, they were members of their tribe buried there, and they had actually elected to leave them buried in that cemetery. They felt that they were very direct that these children had died and been buried there, and they thought that it was a better representation to the world that the world not forget what happened there. And so for those reasons, they wanted to leave the children there. Yes, sir.
I think the mic's going. But is there evidence that these bodies were actually taken up and actually put in the new cemetery? Was there actual evidence?
Oh yes, absolutely. And there's several things that support that. First of all, we know where the basic proximity of where the original cemetery was. That area, candidly, is where buildings and roadways are today. That area has been subject to extensive excavation over the years, starting back in the 1970s. There were archaeologists on site at the time. No human remains were actually found during those projects, so we're very confident there were no children left there. We do have headstones for every child that was in the original cemetery in the current cemetery as well. Additionally, there was a letter that was sent from the commander of the installation to headquarters in Washington, D.C. back in 1927 requesting funding to move this cemetery. That's why we know what we do about this, is because of what's in his letter. He talks about how the cemetery is next to the refuse dump, it's next to the blacksmith shop and the like. I'll get you in just a second, sir. And so one of the big things he was requesting, the biggest cost, was for new caskets. And they wanted a new casket for each one of the children there. And as we have done these 21 excavations, we have found those caskets. Now they're in various states of deterioration, as you might expect after being in the ground for nearly 100 years. But we absolutely have, everything we have found is consistent with them having been moved from the original location to where they are today. And we have photographic evidence from that time frame as well. Yes, sir.
No. I'm from the SIPO board, and my name's Steve Farmer, and we have repatriation grounds over here, and I believe that's where the two loved ones will be coming back to, right, Diane? Oh, it's up to the families. But does the school at Carlisle have a representation of the individuals in each cemetery plots that when the highway moved them, are they going to honor that spot right there, maybe, or is everything final now, as far as, recognition of the ones that had been moved to, which would be all of them? But is there some kind of recognition that the highway department will do for that, in honor of that?
Yes, sir. So we have at the front of the cemetery, there is a map. Basically, it's a listing of every one of the children or everyone who's interred there and the location. And we have now marked those names don't get removed. The children, the 21 children we've returned, their name gets essentially a little star next to it that indicates they've been returned to their loved ones. So the children's names remain there, and then that grave space where the child lay is not used again.
So will the tribal entities have the families honored as far as the ones that were there, so that each one that was laying in the cemetery they come from different tribes, right? Do they get recognized that way too?
On that, their tribal associations are not listed, but on our website they are.
Okay.
So virtually on our websites.
Okay, thank you.
I want to respond to that a little bit too. There are other groups that are working on a memorial or remembering all the story, the bigger story there, the children, all of that. So there's a lot of things happening all at the same time. So I believe the descendants of Carlisle Boarding School, I had spoken with Mr. Ed Hall, who also talked about that. So there's more work to be done than just this. This focus is on the return of the two children, but that is a very important point as far as the bigger story. I also want to respond to the comment about those tribes, other tribes' decisions, and that is a really important point, that some tribes, and because our office works with Native American Graves Repatriation Act, it's often we find other tribes that have different protocols or different, they have that do not remove or move a deceased loved one. So some tribes have those beliefs and therefore would not. They don't repatriate. There are matters that other tribes, and certainly we're one of them, that do bring our loved ones home. So I understand the decision also that, I've heard statements too, that their decision as a tribe to leave their children there speaks to the history and everything that happened there. And then there's also those tribes that would not repatriate under any condition because it goes against their belief system. So there's also that aspect. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the additional information there. Also, sir, more broadly to your question, one of the things that the Army is very committed to is when we get to the end of this project, at such point that every family who wants their child brought home has had their child returned to them. At that point, the Army is committed to extending an offer to consult with any of the federally recognized tribes that had children buried in that cemetery to discuss how we want to go forward with monumentation for that cemetery. We recognize the current monumentation there is inaccurate. It wasn't inclusive in nature in that the Army just decided to do it. It did not talk to any of the families or tribes. And so we want to make sure that all of these children are properly recognized in an inclusive and appropriate manner, consistent with the belief systems and the wishes of the families and tribes that have been impacted. That will occur when we're done with the project. So great question. I really do appreciate you bringing that forward. Yes, ma'am.
No, is this on? Oh, okay. My name is Marie Renville, and I also sit on the THIPO board. I'm the representative from the Haipa district. But my question is, I know back in 1990 when we went after our remains into the Smithsonian, at that time the chairman or the council chartered a bus for relatives to go out there, or district, Oyate members to go. So my question is, because I've never been to that Carlisle either, but I'd like to. But when Diane and them were going, when this first came about, I was approached and asked if I wanted to go, but we would have to fly, and I said I've never been on a plane. So, but if they, maybe if the tribe, our executives, and maybe even you guys, since they are in your care now, maybe you would be willing to fund a trip for tribal members that would like to go out there and see what you have over there, who you have over there yet. And that was, I guess that would be my request to you guys, so that maybe, so that we can see.
That's a fantastic question, ma'am, and I appreciate you asking it. And we want to work with the families and the tribal members to accommodate that to the greatest extent we legally can. Of course, being the federal government, we have laws and regulations that we're bound by, so we're somewhat limited, unfortunately. That said, what we do is that when we go forward with the disinterments, the U.S. Army will pay for 2 members of the family of the deceased, and we will pay for 2 tribal representatives from that child's tribe. We'll pay for their travel to come out to Carlisle, be part of a ceremony to observe whatever they wish to do as part of that disinterment, and then we transfer the remains to them at the conclusion, and then at Army expense the remains are transported back to whichever point the family so desires. So for instance, they might be transported right back to this very location. So that is a decision. So that's what the Army can legally do. It's up to, of course, the families and the tribe to decide who those representatives are. But we're certainly committed to doing that. Yes, sir, in the back.
My grandpa ran away from Carlisle Indian School. His name was Marshall Han. Yeah, my name's Barry Han, and I'm sitting here with my wife, and I'm a veteran. I was in the Navy and the Army. And I want to remind my relatives here that they're doing a good thing, but our families, when you say 2 relatives, we don't have families like that. We don't have any families like that. I don't know any Lakota family that has just 2 relatives. We have these extended families. So our first cousins are brothers and sisters, see. Our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters are all our aunts and uncles and their cousins. And so I know I hear the term legally, the Army can only do certain things. Well, the Army bends the legal. It's good for them. So my thing is when I hear only 2, who gets to go? And it might create family conflicts and problems. We have extended families, and so when the United States Army and Mr. Pratt decided to create this POW camp where our people went, they were trying to break up our extended families. They broke up our Tilshbai. And so my thing is it would be a goodwill on behalf of the United States Army, of which this community here has Woodrow Keeble, a Congressional Medal of Honor winner, to at least make that more than 2 family members. Which one of those 80-year-old nieces or nephews are you going to tell to stay home? Which one of those ones may have a little while left alive are you going to tell them to stay home? Which one of those Takotas that are real small are you going to say to stay home? You can't go with grandma and grandpa. So maybe there could be some negotiations on the amount of people that would get to go to that place, because it just affects more than 2. All our families, have been through this foster care, orphan. I myself went to a Pine Ridge boarding school. And so these are things I think on the Army legally. I would hope that down the line with our representation that started this, maybe we could work on upping that number, because we don't have any families where there's only 2 family members. That is not our concept. Oh.
Thank you very much. That is very helpful feedback. We certainly do appreciate the candor and that additional information. As we move forward with this process, there's a few operating concepts that we have to kind of work with. And those are that there is a presumption that when there's a headstone that has Amos's name on it, has Edward's name on it, we believe that that headstone does mark the remains of each of those children. We have no ability to confirm that before we open the grave. And so, of course, we're not going to open the grave until such time as the family has said, yes, we want to do that. They've submitted the necessary authorization to the Army to open that grave. Once the grave is opened, we do have physical anthropologists who, along with any tribal representatives that wish to be present, will confirm that the remains are consistent with the child that we are looking to return to the family. What we have found is that we have a very high success record of the remains being consistent with the child that we're returning to the family. I can talk in more detail if you like about that, but broadly speaking, for the purposes of today's discussion, that's kind of how we handled this. We have engaged in significant historical research. We're continuing to work with all of the tribal historians to make sure that any administrative inconsistencies and the like are resolved prior to opening any graves, to make sure that we give us the best possible chance of finding your loved one when we open that grave. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Tokenawa, and I'm also on the THIPO board. And I think you're doing as best as you can with what you're allowed, what's allowable, in terms of the Army. But I think there needs to be considerations in terms of tribal people, because this is such a significant event. It's a worldwide event that the United States has not always lived up to its moral responsibilities. And so this is a time where I think this is historic, and those issues need to be brought forward, and I think they will be when you do the monumentation. But I think you have to keep that into the forefront, that these were, in today's terms, really moral wrongs that were committed against tribal children. And today we have the UN Convention that says you can't take the taking of children. But in the times, in the era that those things happened, the United States didn't have the moral will to, appreciate our tribal cultures and our resources, our children. And since these children come from prominent families, those were the fears that they created that still exist in, tribal communities today and make education difficult. So I appreciate what you're doing to help us, but I think there needs to be a larger discussion here because of some of the impacts.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate your input, ma'am, and I appreciate, thank you for the kind words, and I think your observations are very on point. I do believe you're absolutely correct that these were moral wrongs that were perpetrated many years ago, and unfortunately, I can't undo that. I wish I could. And we're trying to, in a very, very, and I recognize it's an extraordinarily small way, try to find some way to help, even if it's very small. And I agree also that this is needs to be part of a much larger discussion of how we address the totality of these challenges. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just had a clarification question. You said you have a very high success rate. Does that mean you don't have a perfect success rate?
That is correct. In the very first year, we opened a grave, and the remains were not consistent with the child we were looking for. It was one of the Northern Arapaho children. And so we went and started working with the historians, and what we discovered was the Army, once again, I'm very transparent. When we're wrong. And the Army had dorked it up. And that's my favorite technical word for, you know what I mean. And so we had dorked it up, and we had messed up the headstone numbering, and we opened the wrong grave. And so the grave that had that child's name on it was not his. It had never been his grave. We just put the headstone in the wrong place. And so we figured out which grave it was. We went over, opened that grave. They just switched them, and sure enough, it was him. So yes, I absolutely own that. We were very gratified, and UFNA certainly was very gratified that we were able to find their third child.
Okay. And what exactly is it that you're looking for when you compare? Is it just general assumed age, or is there more specific items?
Yeah, so for example, if we were looking for, and I don't remember, do you know off the top of your head how old Amos was when he passed? Okay, so Amos was approximately 13 years old when he passed. So if we were to open a grave and find remains that were consistent with a mid-20s adult female, obviously we don't have the right person. Or if we open, if we're looking for a 13, 14-year-old boy and we find a very young child, obviously they're not consistent. So that's how we can physically, and I am not an anthropologist, there may be some in the room, but generally they look for the sex of the general age range. There's a variety of things we can do. We do not engage in destructive testing on the remains. That we do not do.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my question is related to NAGPRA, and why. And I'm really having a little bit of trouble with that. That why doesn't NAGPRA apply in this instance? As an office and a person that works with Native American Graves Repatriation Act, what we would normally do to ensure that this gets done, and it would ensure that our protocols, our families, the research that we need to do, all of those things, there are built within it things that we would utilize to be able to make this happen. Why and how does it not apply?
That's a fantastic question, and I try not to get too legalese on people, so I don't talk about that absent a direct question in great detail. But fundamentally, first and foremost, if you look at the technical language in NAGPRA, the technical language in NAGPRA says that that law applies to what? Collections. It applies to inadvertent discoveries, neither of which a cemetery is. There is nothing in NAGPRA that compels disinterments from a cemetery. So it would only apply to a collection that's under the control of the federal government, a collection that is under the control of an entity funded by the federal government. So like a university, for instance, the Smithsonian, somebody brought the Smithsonian up earlier. All of those NAGPRA absolutely applies to. As I indicated, I deal with it on a near daily basis. I work NAGPRA legal issues. But fundamentally, a cemetery is neither of those things. It is neither an inadvertent discovery nor is it a collection. So based on that, NAGPRA doesn't apply. Additionally, Section 11B4 of the statute actually states that NAGPRA doesn't take away any rights that Native Americans already have. Very important, because when the law was drafted, the intent was not to take away rights, but actually give rights. And so what that means is that if there's another law, policy, regulation that gives a right to a Native American person, that still applies regardless of what NAGPRA says. And so in this case, the Army regulation that we're using says any family member can come in and request their loved one be disinterred. The other advantage of utilizing that authority is that this gives us flexibility to apply funding against this. With NAGPRA, we would not be able to apply any funding. And I certainly understand the comments from the group today. I certainly am empathetic to those. But we are able to at least pay for a certain number of tribal members, relatives, pay for the actual disinterment, the whatever funeral material that is used associated with repackaging, and then the shipment of the remains back to wherever they can. We pay for headstones if that's requested. So there's a lot of things that we couldn't pay for if this was an NAGPRA action. So this actually gives the Army a lot more flexibility to apply some of our resources against the challenge. And I'll talk about, and I think I know where you're going, and so if you give me I'll beg your indulgence for a minute. We're going to talk about closest living relatives in just a minute, and I think I'm going to address some of your concerns in that when we get to that slide, if you will indulge me for just a minute.
One more question.
Of course.
To NAGPRA. But under NAGPRA, we would be able to apply for grants. The other THPO people maybe in the room, that's what we would do. We would apply for the research grants that would allow us to understand exactly what we were. And then I also think of American Indian Religious Freedom Act, because our ceremonies, those persons, those societies that do this work are vital. So within your process, there's no room for that. Within the other, I believe that we would have, the ability to ensure that we're doing what we need to do.
Well, I certainly would support you applying for any grants or funding that you would otherwise get. And just for the record, we've coordinated this position with National NAGPRA. And they agree and support with the position that we've taken to try to find a way that we can internally fund this rather than waiting on you getting grants awarded and that sort of stuff. I don't know anything about this approach that would prohibit you from, one, applying for grants associated with this. I do believe that you'd still be eligible for those, and that's certainly a possible revenue of funding. And certainly we support you engaging in, and part of, and actually in the next slide, I'll show you a little bit about this. We actually fully support and encourage any traditional ceremonies, practices, and the like that you want to engage in as part of this process to occur at Carlisle. We give nearly complete and absolute latitude on that to engage in those traditional practices. So, great question about RFRA. You're absolutely correct about that, and I want to emphasize, so thank you for bringing that up. I want to emphasize our goal is to support RFRA and support your traditional practices with regards to these ceremonies and the disinterment and return of your children. Chairman.
Yes, so just to add on top of what Tamara was talking about, and the gentleman here, and everybody else is concerned about the Corps' allowing of 2 representatives and possibly only 2 family members. So as Tamara talked about, there's a process that, it's reburial and transportation process. And we, as tribal leaders or just the relatives, do not have knowledge of that process. So obviously we're going to have to bring those people with us for that process. But yet you only say you're going to pay for 4 people. So we as tribal leaders, what do we have to do, or what can we do to engage to the Army to allow for more people to go? And I don't think we should have to apply for grants to fund that. Obviously, the United States government took our ancestors from their lands and forced them to go without any consent from their parents or whoever was their guardians at that time. And then you're going to make the rules to say you can only take this many people. Well, we'll only pay for this many people. I think you should pay for whoever wants to go that's a relative of them, along with tribal leadership and some of our spiritual leaders who know this process. To even from the excavating, there's a process. From putting them in the box, there's a process. From transporting them from there to here, there is a process. And some of us do not know that process. So I kind of feel for some of the descendants, that aren't going to have to, or aren't going to get that chance to be able to be a part of that process. And then there again, the United States government going to do what they do best. They put us against each other. It's always been that way. The United States government puts rules in place that aren't part of our culture. Our Tawahe is bigger than what the government thinks. That's just the way it is. So I don't know how or what your roles are, but I would seriously try to look at finding more funds so we can take more people. This is a historic event here. These are our ancestors. Some of them guys, the one that's from Spirit Lake, there's at least 100 descendants that I could think of from probably just being born a couple days ago to 85, 86 years old. So that's just from him now. He had brothers and sisters. Could you imagine how many Wanatas there are at Spirit Lake? And then we can only take 2 descendants? So there has to be something looked into where the government should be accountable to allow for more of our members from each tribe to go and be a part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I really do appreciate what you just gave us, and certainly this will be part of a follow-on discussion with, it can be you personally or your designated elders or officials, and that's part of this process. This is a process, and so we're going to have to move forward with that, and so incredibly well said. Thank you very much for sharing that with us and giving us an important point to consider as we move forward and how we're able to do this for you and all of the persons involved in this matter. Thank you.
Hello. So I have a lot of relatives, like we all do, that were in the service, and luckily those relatives are here, buried at home. So I don't have knowledge on this process that you're saying the Army can bring relatives home for anyone that are buried in these cemeteries. So when it's not a boarding school child, what is how different is it from this process? I'm trying to understand how how this is better than what, you know, a regular family would be getting? Because this is a super special circumstance, obviously.
Yes, no, great question. So the unique circumstance here is that the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, as it was formerly known, was operated by the Department of Interior through what was then known as the Indian Bureau. And so the Army actually had nothing to do with actually operating the school. It was after the school closed about a year later that the Army had the property transferred to them and they opened an Army installation on the property. It is because of the fact that the Army still owns that land, operates on that land, and because of the Army's very ill-informed and unfortunate decision in 1927 to move the cemetery from its original location to where it presently is, that we are engaged in this process. Unfortunately, all of the other off-reservation boarding schools that were operated by the Department of the Interior or other entities, the Army had nothing to do with those. And so this process and what we're talking about today doesn't apply to those circumstances. It doesn't apply to circumstances where I'm aware of children who, while attending Carlisle, they went on what were called outings. And so they were maybe working on a farm or they were learning a trade somewhere, things like that, and they died while not at Carlisle and they are buried elsewhere. For instance, I'm aware of a child that's buried in a cemetery in Philadelphia. The Army has no control over those remains. We can't do anything about that because we simply have no legal basis to take any sort of action. And so this is a very unique circumstance. And so really for the purpose of what we're talking about here, we're really unfortunately only talking about these two children with reference to, you know, the particulars of our meeting today, because they are buried on Army property and the Army moved them in 1927. Does that answer your question, ma'am? Who have relatives buried at the Carlisle Cemetery? Yes, ma'am. Just at the one cemetery, that is correct.
The way I understood when you first began speaking was that the Army does this for other families that have members buried, but it's only at this one cemetery?
Just at this one cemetery, yes, ma'am. This is the only cemetery that has Native American children from a boarding school buried in it that is operated by the Army.
So this is an exception that only Natives are receiving this funding and this service of getting
That is
remains
correct.
returned. So I would argue the point, the opposite, not that we can't look at all the other boarding schools, but that this is the one boarding school that fall under the Army. I understand how it happened and all of that. So there should be more than 2 people that are sent, because if we're talking about 2 children for just this community, I mean, if you look across Indian country, there's so many boarding schools. I went to one of them. My family went to the Flanger Indian School all the way back. And it's hundreds and thousands of children. The Army is only responsible for this one boarding school. Why wouldn't there be more exceptions made than 4 people going? That just makes no sense to me.
As I indicated earlier, and I certainly understand, especially the chairman's very impassioned and appropriate comments. The challenge is we have very specific legal limitations as to what we can and can't spend funding on. And so that's the challenges we have. The federal government, we can only spend money on things we're specifically authorized to spend money on. And so absent legal authority, we can't pay for certain things. So I certainly understand, Chairman, your comments. I look forward to working more directly with your representatives and Chairman Hopkins, your representatives, as we move forward on this. We're going to do our very best to find whatever authorities we can to best possibly support the family's involvement here. I have another question, or sorry, sir.
Yeah, this must have come up. There have been 28 disinterments so far, right?
21.
21, okay, 28. This must have come up before, right? How was it resolved?
This is the standard that we have handled in every particular case, is that we have 2 immediate family members, 2 tribal members have attended. So that is what we have done with all of the other tribes that we have worked with. Yeah. And that Ms. Yates just mentioned something. We welcome anybody from the tribe to attend. That's what the Army paid for their travel expenses associated with that. And I do want to emphasize, we will pay for the entire process for that travel. So we will pay for tribal representatives, because we certainly understand, and I thought the chairman's point was great, you have experts within your community that know the proper way to handle the burials, the proper belief systems, all of those sort of things. And so we have all the tribal representatives and family members on station from before we start digging to the day we actually do the transfer of the remains to the family. And so Mr. Gilfillan just offered another important point that I should mention. I am aware that the Department of Interior, led by Secretary Howland, that they are looking at ways that they can move forward to provide additional resources against these exact challenges that we're talking about. I am in direct communication with her assistant secretary who is handling these. I mean, she and I talk on a regular basis. I talk regularly with the Office of Tribal Justice at DOJ, as well as the White House Office of Tribal Affairs. So we are looking at all of the possible resources and revenue streams and spending authorities that we can leverage to try to address these challenges. Hopefully in the future we will get new authorities and new funding, and we can move forward with other possibilities. But I certainly want to emphasize, I hear loud and clear from all of you your concerns. I come from a large family myself personally. I understand that would be very difficult for my family. They said, well, you can only bring 2. I certainly, on a personal level, fully understand that. And so I want you to know that you have my commitment, that we're going to continue to work with you. I don't know what the final outcome is, but we will continue to absolutely work with you to find the best possible outcome. And I know I have another question somewhere in the back from a couple people. So,
another one before me? Sorry for asking so many questions, but my mom taught me the dumbest question was the one never asked. So as I want to ask my next question, but first I'm going to let you know I'm a great-grandfather, a grandfather, and of course a parent. And when I hear these ages like 13, that really boggles my mind, because why would a person die at 13? And how many records do you have of these 21 children, and what were their ages? Are they all children, or is this a blanket issue?
So the ages of the children, I don't know them off the top of my head here, but they all range from about 8, 9 years old to, I think the oldest one was in the 18, 19, 21. So the oldest one we've disinterred was 21. So that's the range of the ages, from children, teenagers, young adults.
What's the record of their death? What's the autopsy, or what's the doctor, or who determined what was their determination from? It had to be a professional, a doctor, or a nurse.
Well, what I can say from the records we have found, and I want to emphasize, the records are spotty at best in certain cases. This was something operated, I hate to throw my colleagues over at Department of Interior under the bus, so to speak, but they were the ones that operated the school, not the Army. And so I have seen the register of deaths. The vast majority of the students that are buried in the cemetery died from tuberculosis. It was unfortunately a situation where you took children that I suspect were very used to being outdoors, not in close confined quarters, and they were now being put essentially in barracks, for lack of a better term. And so they were in close confines, and they developed tuberculosis, and they passed from that. That's not all of them, but that is what the record tends to indicate. Most of them that passed, it was from TB.
So almost closest to slavery is the way these children were treated, right? Children slavery, that's how you treat them when you put them in barracks where they can't warm up, they can't wash up, and it's not your fault. But here's my question. How does that get recognized on their tombstone? Because when the tombstone's set up and mounted, that's the final project, the final part of the project, right? It's said and done, right? So what's it gonna say on that tombstone in that new graveyard for them? What's it gonna say there?
Well, the final headstone upon disinterment and return to the family, that's up to the family what they want to put on the headstone. They can essentially put what they desire on the headstone, and it's a family decision. It's not, once again, the Army doesn't want to get in the middle of family matters. Ma'am, I know you've been patiently waiting. Thank you so much. Did you have a question?
My name is Maggie Lorenz. I come from Spirit Lake. I live in the Twin Cities now. I just had a question for you. You mentioned that the Army doesn't have legally authorization to spend, over these certain limits. And I'm curious, and you mentioned a little bit to this, who does have that authorization to approve those special appropriations? And if it is Deb Hallen, or somebody in the Department of the Interior, is there any kind of bill or anything like that happening that we can support, or is there someone that we can talk to talk about those special appropriations?
That's an excellent question. The Department of Interior doesn't have any specific authorities over anything that we're working with here. So the authorities related to this actually are congressionally mandated authorities. Yes, ma'am.
Had to wait for it to turn on. Yes, I think what it comes down to, again, are having the resources to do what we need to do with our children. And the concern in following the Army's process and it not being considered NAGPRA also leads to, and I'm thinking of other tribes too, whether or not the process is so narrow that by following what you guys do with next of kin and affidavits, how does that work if a family isn't able to meet the standard that you need to identify for that child?
That's a fantastic question. And that's the one I was asking you to indulge me for just a minute, and I will address in great detail a couple slides from now, because that's a fantastic question, and the good news is it's actually fairly easy. And that what we have found is that the tribes that have moved forward so far have actually had great success in finding a relatively direct solution. Sir, you have a question.
Is it on?
Could I ask you to speak right into it? I'm very hard of hearing. I am so sorry.
Good?
Much better.
My first question is kind of for the chairman and Tamara maybe. So on the meeting agenda, thank you. So on the meeting agenda, there's it says Edward Upright, son of Wa'anatang. I'm pretty close with Unkana Spencer Wana, who's a direct descendant of Waanata. He teaching me Dakota, how to talk Dakota. And Unkana Spencer, he's Waanata Iwohadak. He's always talking about his great grandpa Waanata. And so the upright boy would be one of his extended grandfathers, that being his son. And so I feel like that'd be really important to him, and he's not here, but if he knew about it, I'm pretty sure he'd be here. So I wanted to ask about to our chairman and Tipo, whatever that is what's is there something we can do to notify more people? Because I didn't know about this, and this is real important to me. Luckily I work here at the college, so I just came down. But I'd like to have you guys think about that. And then the second question was for you. So in our ways, our Dakota Chajig, they're really, the Indian names, they're really important to us and how we pass on in our beliefs. And I wanted to ask, is there a record of these children that passed away? Are there traditional names? Are they preserved anywhere in any records that you possibly have?
In the beginning of this, I shared the research and things that went into where we are. And I understand some of it may have gotten cut off on the YouTube video before we started at 11 o'clock, before the welcome. So I'd be more than happy to share all of that again, because that's my job, to ensure that their stories are told amongst our people, that their legacy is intact. I'm well aware of the Wana family. We had reached out, spoke to Kale, is what we would call him, Spencer's wife Lillian, who works very closely, with the Pate Chantewi, and so they're aware of that too. As far as getting more people aware and sharing this, I feel like I have to say that this has been work that's been done strictly by me, one person. And I haven't been able to have the sort of reach and impact that I wish that I had. And now with the tribe being involved and more people taking notice, I expect that it will be broader and louder. And now, regardless of what we're hearing here, and you hear some of the issues related to the going and the disinterment and what's called the transfer ceremony for the relatives to receive these boys, regardless of any of that, what we do here is important. And so when we bring them home, when we bring them back to our 1867 treaty territory, the ceremonies that we have here, the relatives, their loved ones to meet them here, all of those things are a discussion that will be held between the Waanata families of Spirit Lake and Sisseton-Wahpeton Waanata relatives, and also, the details of that will be discussed between the tribes too.
Thank you.
You asked a very good question, and one of the really unfortunate things that we've discovered as we've looked at the limited records the Army has is that in an effort, and people have mentioned this before today, in an effort to strip away the native culture from these children, i.e. force them to assimilate into white culture, they took away their native name and they gave them new English names and made them use those names only in many cases. And so to that end, unfortunately the records often only reflect that name or the amalgamation of a native name and a English name. And so we certainly, I've enjoyed working with Tamara over the past 5 years, and certainly anything from the tribal side that can inform the Army's information here. And I will tell you that in one case, one of the tribes who asked to leave their children buried there, one of the things they wanted was the headstones corrected, to make sure that the names were correct and to remove the Christian cross off the headstone, because they were like, these children were not Christians. And okay, sure, no problem. At Army expense, we put up brand new headstones that reflected what the tribe asked to have on those headstones. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. But the Army, I want to emphasize, I know that I can't promise you everything you might want today, and I wish I could, to be real honest, but I can't. But what I can tell you is we are committed to continuing to have a conversation with you and see where we can find mutual agreement. We are committed, absolutely unequivocally, that any child that a family wants to have them returned, that we will do so at Army expense. And that in the cases of children who aren't returned, we're going to continue to make sure that cemetery is taken care of, and that the headstone is as accurate as possible. But fantastic question. Ms. Yates, okay, you already have the slide up for me. This is an aerial shot, you might recognize Google Maps here, that kind of shows the cemetery. The cemetery's down here at the bottom. You can actually see the rows of white headstones there. And these additional information that's on there this is how this is set up while we're doing disinterments. That kind of light green lines, that reflects fencing. So we put up 8-foot high fences that are impermeable to sight. So you can't see through them. This isn't a public thing. This is a private time for families and tribal members to grieve and heal. And we want to make sure that the media, general passersby, that sort of thing, don't have the opportunity to take advantage of anybody that's in there paying their respects. We want to make this as respectful as absolutely possible. So that's why we put this high fence up around there. You'll see that we have a tent that's completely dedicated to the tribal members that are present there for whether it's for simply taking time with other tribal members, whether it's for holding your own meetings, whether it's for engaging in ceremonies. That's what that's for. You see the other necessary tents for the actual execution of the project. That's Ms. Yates' team. Ms. Yates is the director of the Office of Army Cemeteries. It's her team that actually executes the mission. And so, assuming we're going forward, you will see her on the ground, whenever we actually do the disinterment, she'll be running that piece. Any questions about this specific slide before I move on to more substantive information? Just kind of wanted to give you an overview of what you would see there. Okay, so we've already alluded to it, kind of what are the next steps? How do we move forward? And so first and foremost, as I mentioned just a moment ago, the Army is fully committed to the disinterment of any child and their return to their loved ones, wherever that may be, at Army expense. The challenge here that Tamara has been alluding to is that we ask that the closest living relative simply submit a written request. I have copies of the paper that you would need to fill out. They're available to download on the website, et cetera, et cetera. And what I will say is that the concept, and this has been talked about already here today, the concept of next of kin is very different from culture to culture. In the culture I grew up in, it literally means my closest living relative is my father. It might be my child. It might be so on and so forth. I also recognize that in many cultures, my closest living relative may be a person that I don't share immediate blood with, but that could still be my closest living relative. The United States Army is not going to question anybody that submits an affidavit that says, I would like to disinter this child from Carlisle Cemetery, and I am their closest living relative. So this is, I believe, is a family and tribal matter. And so the families and the tribes can make this decision, and they can decide who is the closest living relative of this child. For basic due process reasons, we do a posting in the Federal Register that says we are planning to disinter the following children from Carlisle. You have to this date to submit any comments. We did have one situation where a person submitted an affidavit requesting to disinter their aunt, and then another tribe came in and said, no, she's from our tribe. And so the two families worked it out, because the Army isn't going to get in the middle of a family matter. That's just, we don't do that. That's not our business. It's not our place. We asked that they work it out between the two of them. They did so, and the child was disinterred and returned home where everybody agreed she belonged. And so, you know, there's ways to work with this that are very flexible, and we're very open-minded on what exactly constitutes the closest living next to kin. Because we understand, with possibly one or two exceptions, none of the children buried in that cemetery had offspring, and they had no issue. So obviously this isn't a traditional, you know, direct line that you might see other places. So I hope that addresses your question early, Tamara, and I'm happy we can have further discussion if you have more comments or questions.
Sure. One more question, and then I want us to take a bit of a break. We'll continue the conversation, but so that people can eat. I know we have some older folks that need to be sure that they're eating too. In the case of George Walker, and I talked about how we had been searching to find his relatives, and I cannot identify his family in any way. He is not in the cemetery. I'm aware of that. But in that sort of situation, who would sign for him? Would the tribe be able to?
Well, what I would suggest, you know, obviously we don't have this scenario since he's not buried there, but let's say he was, for sake of discussion. At that point, if the tribal leadership decided to appoint you maybe as his closest living next to kin, we're not going to dispute that. That's a tribal decision. And so I'm not going to tell either the chairman how to run your tribe by any means. That's wrong. That'd be inappropriate for the Army to do that. So I leave that up to you, how you and your tribal council and your elders wish to do that.
Is that within the regs that you?
The regs don't specifically address that, so that's how I'm reading the regs as the attorney responsible for this matter.
Okay, gotcha.
I might suggest other tribes, including my own, who have also, there are 5 Saugee in Carlisle, so as a tribal member and maybe that representative like yourself, or thinking that same thing, by tribal referendum, you can assign this TIPO or individual as that responsible party to move forward and do all the due diligence to bring that child home.
Okay, since we are at a little bit of a break, we need somebody that would be willing to say the prayer for our meal, and we can eat and continue the discussion. Arnold.
So we're going to make a spirit plate and pray for the food so we can eat. But I do have a question, though, while we're waiting, is that you talked about the tent and stuff set aside for different ceremonies. Is there a place to have a sweat lodge ceremony where we have to have a fire and all that stuff? There's not? So that's something that's going to be very important to us when we do this ceremony.
We can work on that if that's a specific request. So just let us know. We'll do our very best to accommodate that.
Okay, yeah, we would need to have a sweat, especially if it's people that are going to be involved in the actual, uncovering the grave and stuff like that. They need to be involved in that ceremony because it is a very sacred thing that we're going to be doing, especially when you're digging the grave and opening up the casket again. If someone doesn't go through that ceremony, it'll affect their mind and how they think and who they are. So we have to have that part of that ceremony and the people that are going to be involved in that ceremony to be able to do those things. So. Yeah, it can be off-site. That's just my comment I wanted to make, though. We're just waiting for the spirit plate to be made, and then we'll make a prayer. So.
So what I wanted, Tom and I talked about doing a little bit of the information that we shared before the program began, before the chairman's prayer. So what that was some of the research related to the boys and the children here. Fine. You know, the picture, the one picture that I've been using, sure, that'd be great. And I think people have seen this because this was on the notice, and I want to remind everybody, anybody that's listening too, that this is the first meeting. We have more that we need to do as tribes and as families. But within this picture here, this picture is of the 6 children that left in 1879 and arrived at Carlisle on November 6th in 1879. So this picture is 5 children. 6 of our children left from this agency with Agent Chrissy. And the 2 girls that are pictured here are Emily or Justine Laframboise and Nancy Renville. And then the 3 boys here. So first of all, the child that's not pictured here is Amos Laframboise. It is not in this photo. And Amos Laframboise is somebody I think that's important to all of us that have been working on this issue with Carlisle. And when we were in 2016, Attorney Bullard mentioned that meeting with Rosebud. And during that meeting, the Rosebud Youth Council gave Vine Marks, our Cultural Preservation Board chairman, and myself this chair, this place setting with sage, with cedar, with tobacco. And for their children, I believe 10 children, they had all of the place settings set up. And I think if anybody watched the videos of when they brought their children home, that's what they had there. So now that we know more about Edward, Vicki Eaglebear, who had assisted the Rosebud Youth Council, has told me they will have one for Edward as well. So we'll have 2 of them as we proceed in future meetings for whatever we need to do. But Amos is the first child to die there at Carlisle. And we talked a little bit about how illness affected so many children and how many children lost their lives because of illness. For example, I believe Edward died from pneumonia after having, I can't remember the other illness, but something very drastic. So the illness that Amos died from, I'm not sure, but he dies after being there only 20 days. So Amos Laframboise. And of course, most people here on the Lake Traverse Reservation know the Laframboise name. I'm so happy that there's somebody from the Laframboise family here. And I try to reach out to as many relatives as possible because we do want the family, larger family, all involved in this, and they're definitely needed when it comes to Amos. And so Amos being the first child to die there, according to what I've read and seen, Amos was buried in, and remember everything is real new at Carlisle, he's buried in Ashland County, or Cumberland County, Ashland Cemetery. He's buried in the cemetery there, and the people, the local townsfolk and others, do not want an Indian child buried amongst them. And there is strong language in the letters, and of course that is the time and the era. They used their land grant for the cemetery to state that it could only be for white people. So they had dug him up and they moved him. And because he had been moved more than any other child there, I think, and that had occurred to him, the youth at Rosebud were particularly focused on him and felt that he was somebody special to them too. So they're watching us as we do this, and they're willing to help and support, and we need to bring our youth into this as well. But Amos Saframboys, and then the next child to die is John Renville. And John Renville, that story is particularly sad. Actually, they all are, but in this one, I felt like it was really, it made me emotional and choked up, because what I found was years ago, I found a newspaper article and I shared it with the large Renville family and descendants of Gabriel Renville. And the newspaper article said that John Renville had died. John Renville died at Carlisle, and it said that his father, Gabriel Renville, went to go and get him and brought his sister home with him. And the person writing it had said that there was nothing sadder than watching a Dakota girl lose her life, knowing that she was so far away from her home, from her friends, and from her family, and how sad that must have been for her. So with that, I knew that there was a John Renville and that he had died there, but until this whole issue came up in 2015, 2016, then I referred back to that. And looking at because we all want to know, how did they die? How did they die? What happened? All of those sort of details, who they are, what their story is, who's their family. All of that bigger picture is so important. So with John, I had looked at, I'll say that there are very few records in 1879. Very few records in 1879, and a lot of the, for example, in 1867, the establishment of Lake Traverse under our treaty of February 19th, 1867, there is a census record of our people at Fort Wadsworth. And within that census record, it'll state all of the different, the name of that head of house, and then it'll say how many, wife or women and children. And that's it. So for anybody that's done and worked with Native American genealogy, that makes it really hard to track a child and others. So that, and then there are some records related to allotments in 1874. There are treaty signers. We can look at the treaty documents and see the signers on those things. And then also during the period of time between Spirit Lake and Sisseton-Wahpeton, in the 1872 agreements, there are names and families and things like that, somewhat mentioned, but very limited. So to find records related to all of this is very, very hard. And I had opportunity years ago to go to the National Archives and Records and look at what was available according to their finding aids and what we were able to see there, and that's also very limited. But as a researcher, we always, I believe, start internally, start locally, start from where, we can, and then work towards those things. So I wound up looking at some of the word carrier the word carrier. And people that know what that is a missionary publication called Iape Oye, and it is from 1877, those early years, and it goes all the way to 1940. The fact that there was, it said 1870, I think it's even 72, I thought about that one day. I was in the archives collection room, in the exhibit room, and you know, not able to find anything, not able to find any records. And I thought about that, the word carrier book. I happen to have a unique book that was given to me by my grandfather, and it's a bound volume of different issues of the word carrier. It is a really old book, so we don't touch it or use it or any of that sort. I don't allow it to be even reference material. It is mine, and it's worth looking at, but there's digital images available online for every page of the word carrier. So anyway, I walked over to the book and started flipping through it, went back to 1879 and 1872, moving forward, and I found a notice in it where the headmaster for the Sisseton Mission School is talking about these boys that come to the mission school. And within it, for the first time ever, I saw the names Edward Upright and I saw the name George Walker. So, you know, that just blew me away that that was the first time I saw those boys' names in anything outside of the Carlisle student cards and things of that sort. So in looking at those things and looking at the Carlisle newspaper, so I knew John had passed away. The word carrier also talks about that. And in the word carrier, it talks about how John Renville has passed on at Carlisle. The chief is here to gather his beautiful boy. It says, our prayers are with his father as they take their beautiful boy home. So when I read the article in the Carlisle newspaper, it talked about what happened that day. And these are, I believe it's like 1880. And they had gone to a camp. And they were going to be camping outside for whatever period of time. And it did state the name of this sort of a camp. And as they hiked to it, it was a really hot day. And they said that John Renville had taken a drink from a stream. He took a drink from a stream. And from that moment on came the fevers and hemorrhages. So obviously he was sick. And it did say that they had sent him back to the school and that he was unwell. And it talked about how his little sister, and in that picture of the children, she's in there with him. And I know you can't see real well in this, but John Renville is the tallest boy there. There are other images of him where he's sitting in the center. He's just a good-looking young man, and he's very dignified looking. He's holding his hat. And then the girl towards the center is his sister Nancy Renville. So it said that Nancy Renville, his sister, had doted over him, and she sat by his bedside while he was sick. And it talked about how what an amazing boy he was, what an amazing child he was, and how he was speaking to her in such a calm, he had kind of a faraway look in his eyes, and he was speaking to his sister in such a calm manner. And I thought about, as we, he knows he's making his journey. And, he's looking out for his sister. He's talking to her, trying to ease her, comfort her as he's passing. And what an amazing thing that must have been. And what it says is that we here, and they mean there at Carlisle, often see exceptional qualities. Qualities such as intelligence and manners and all of these things. And it said, but all of these characteristics were exceptionally pronounced in this young man. And our prayers are with his father as he takes his beautiful boy home. And it was really sad. It was really sad to think of that for Gabriel Renville at the time. And I even thought about how, like, as a mother, you know, I have sons that I'm very proud of. I have my Chaske. These are all, many of them are the children of chiefs, sons of leaders. And that oldest son, you have invested into your teaching, you're shaping them, and they are going to be the people that look over your family, maybe yourself in your old age, or maybe a leader of your people, of your nation, the way that John Renville more than likely would have been. So what a terrible loss, not just to the family itself, but to our nation as a whole. You know, I think he would have been something very special. So when John dies, that is the second child to die. And then there's Edward Upright. Edward Upright. So Edward Upright, according to the school card, and we had some of this up there, the Digital Resource Center for Carlisle or Dickinson, is it school, Dickinson? They have all of the information there. Anybody can go on. You can see, like on this, where the photo is, it just shut off as I pointed up there, that you can click on any of the links and look at anything related to the children, the students. I would encourage anybody that wants to research to go to the website and look at some of those things, look at the photos and such. So Edward Upright, it simply said, son of Wa'anata. And it didn't say anything more. It really didn't give. Some of the cards will say a mother. Like, for example, it said John Renville, child of Gabriel and Mary Renville. Let's see, Amos Laframboise, it says son of Joseph Laframboise. Edward, it simply says Wa'anata. So right away I thought about how many times as a genealogist I saw Wa'anata in our records, in our documents, in our censuses, our tribal census, our annuity rolls, and others. And there's one in particular, John Wa'anata, but I couldn't find anything related to family, nothing that really fit the era of 1879. And bear in mind, I tried to do this for years, actually, from 2015 to just about 2 months ago. About 2 months ago, Maggie, do you remember when that was? That there was, and how this happened was, I think, really cool. That one of the Kit Fox, and reminding everybody that we work so closely with our spiritual people, our elders, the Women's Society, the Buffalo Heart Women, and the Kit Fox, our veterans. They each have a unique role. They're needed. We're dependent on them. And so one of the Kit Fox has been working with us, and he came in, looked at what I was doing, started to kind of focus on that, and saw that I was trying to find information for Edward Upright and George Walker. And so he took that to the Kit Fox meeting and shared it with the other veterans, the other Kit Fox. And as they went through it, one of them works for the BIA. And we had checked some of that resource too, but he himself also had a contact in another BIA office. So all of this is going on in the background while I'm unaware. And one day they come down and they say, Tamara, come, I want to show you. We found him. And I literally said, no, you didn't. No, you didn't. And, because it had been like 5-6 years. And so the THPO officer and myself went down to the BIA and their office, sat down, flipped through the pages, and there it was within the probate. The other BIA office, I believe at Spirit Lake, had sent over this document, or how they pulled it up using their database and their systems. So there were people that were involved to help show this. And there it was, and it says Wa'anata, and that his son dies at Carlisle at about the age of 12 or 13 many years ago. So that's in testimony, and that was the first time I ever saw anything that identified who he was. So then that means Wa'anata, Spirit Lake, I need to find, and the fact that it is Wa'anata, like how, and I said to somebody else, like how the Lakota, they have Sitting Bull, it would be like that. This is Sitting Bull's son. This is Wa'anata's son. And Wa'anata, as a hereditary chief line, our Standing Buffalo family, Sweet Corn, we have as tribes our own historical figures, our people of importance to us in our history. And Wa'anata is certainly one of them in that hereditary line. Wa'anata or Charger, sometimes Waneta, all of that is so important. And so when I realized that, I put this post out there that I need to see the Wa'anata genealogy. I need to find the families. I know we have families in Sisseton-Wahpeton, and we were already in conversations and preparing for this as well. And so Maggie, who's here, answered a post, just randomly too, that, by chance. And so within minutes, we're connecting, called, and began to sort of piece together, what we have now moving forward. I contacted Oliver Gord up in Spirit Lake because he had been here during our 150th anniversary of our 1867 treaty, and talked about the Wa'anata genealogy. So to be specific, this is Wa'anata Nupa, which is second. And he is buried at St. Michael's. He's also, I understand, had donated land to St. Michael's, and and is in the cemetery there. So because as you've heard in the process, finding the next of kin and finding those families that will, enter into this process on behalf of these boys. So that is Edward Upright. And next boy to die is George Walker. And it's always kind of a point of sadness for me that 1879, November 6, 1879, and by 1884, all of our boys that left were gone. And George Walker, what I found in George Walker in the first word carrier article that noted Edward Upright and George and the other boys, it talked about how great these kids were. And it said how they were like George would fill the water pail when he found it empty without even being asked. And that, it was clear by their description that these boys were intelligent, they were well-mannered, they were really awesome young men. And it said the only problem that they found with the boys was that they didn't stay long. They left soon. And of course, we now know that they leave because they're going to Carlisle. And it said we didn't know if they felt they had enough education or what. So George Walker, when they arrive in Carlisle, the next things that I see on him, in his student card, I still to this day do not know his family. The words on his student card, it says like Sudan, S-U-D-A-N, and the second word is hekta, like behind, or, if the language people here want to help me, I have another letter that I'd really like translated, if our students here at the college would be willing to take that on. But because so then began the whole looking for Suda and Hekta and not being able to find anything, nothing. And to this day, I still can't say who George Walker's family is. And trust me, if whatever you're thinking, we've probably thought it too. We've sat there and stared at these images for a really long time. So look for the Walker families, but bear in mind again that, the English names in that time frame aren't likely established, and who gave him the word Walker, the name Walker. When the word carrier article says these 6 boys arrive, they're actually more than 6. One of them was really naughty, they say. He was a regular Ishmael, whatever that means. And so the first order of the day was to give them English names. So what they were before that, or who they were known as, is not there. So those English names, because they're there, Edward Upright, George Walker, they would have followed them to Carlisle. So I'm not able to find his family because of that, and thus far. I mean, we certainly don't give up on those kind of things. But in the letters that I saw, there is, on his student card, on George's student card, it says up on the corner, it says dead. So at first we were wondering if he was at the cemetery, but there's no headstone, no record of him being buried there. And you can see his tribe, it says Sisseton-Wahpeton, and underneath where it says like home address, but this is also where sometimes you see the connection to the family. It says what looks like Sudan, S-U-D-A-N. And, it's not Sudan, Diane, it's not Sudan. But whatever that is, we haven't been able to identify the family. But you can see within the different links there, S-E-E-D-A-N. We had some of the elders that work with language guessing or thinking that it was maybe an S-I, like C, or related to foot, siha. We've gone over all of these things, have not found it yet, have not found hekta either, not yet. So, but George himself, at one point there's a letter from, in the Carlisle records that says that George wanted to go home. He wanted to go home. But we talked him into staying on a little while longer. And then the next thing that I found was a letter written by George, and this is where, if it's in Dakota, I want you to see if you can help me with this. I'll get you the image for it too. I've had, don't go anywhere. I've had I've had Vine Marks help me to translate a portion of it. And at the beginning of the letter, what it says is, it says that I have not, while I've been here, no one has written to me. and which in itself is, I'll find it and I'll bring it over to you. It is, which is kind of sad. You know, he's saying that nobody has written me since I've been here. And there's another statement in it that says, I will tell you about it when I see you. So you can see it's his intent to come home. And he's writing to the Sisseton Mission School. And when he's saying this there, I'm imagining he's thinking, by writing there, I could come home. If you let me come home, I'll go to school there at the school. And he's going to talk to this headmaster about that. And then the next letter says that instructing Agent Chrissy to come and get him because his health is failing. It's affecting his health now. So if you can imagine the sadness, the loneliness, all the boys that he came there with are all gone. It's just him